Otto Frank was as well on this transport, and you know, they really treated us with respect. So, so in Odessa then we waited for to be able to get back home, which eventually a troop transport ship came, and we were able to go through the Mediterranean to Marseille, then up to France, to Belgium, and eventually to Holland. And there we stood, still with our Russian uniform. We had no money, and nobody took any notice of us. So everybody was very, very upset, you know. The Russian had looked after us, and there we come back to our country, and nobody bothered with us. But we hadn't realized that the Dutch was the last occupied country. Belgium, France, Italy was already freed, but in Holland the Germans stayed till the bitter end, and it was called the Hunger Winter. Many, many Dutch people died, tens of thousands of people died, because the Germans took all the food away the Dutch produced. The Dutch people ate tulip bulbs and burned their furniture, and then came people, you know, and they didn't really know what to do with us. So we went first to stay with some friends, and then we went back to the Merwede plant to see perhaps, you know, we could go back there. And as we had come so late in February 1940, we had a furnished apartment which belonged to a Christian. And so she let us back in again. So this was extremely lucky, because most people, when they came back, had really nowhere to go. Also people had moved in with their furniture, and so Otto Frank, for instance, had nowhere to go, and he stayed with Miep Gies. Have you heard of that name? She was one of the helpers who died, by the way, a few months ago. She was 100 years old, and she lived near, as well in the same area, and she took Otto in. And then we waited for news from our family. After about 3 weeks, we got a notification from the Red Cross that both my father and my brother had perished in Mauthausen, Austria, just a few days before the American army came to liberate that camp. You can imagine my mother and me were just heartbroken. Otto Frank came as well to tell us about the dreadful news. Both his daughters and his wife had died. He was 57 years old, and when he left, I sat on my mother's lap and we cried, and my mother said, well, at least we have each other, but this poor man has nobody to, what does he live for? And a few days later he came again. He had a little parcel in his arm, and he said, I must show you something. And he opened it up very, very carefully, and it was this, of course, Anne's diary. And that little book gave him a purpose in life. He always said, I feel as if my little girl is still with me. But he was amazed about the book. He said, I really didn't know my own child. And that is very interesting, because he was with her 2 years together. They did schoolwork together, they they read together, they talked together, and nevertheless he didn't know her deep thoughts. And she says as well in her diary, I've got two sides. One not so nice side which she shows to the outside world, and another side which I really want to achieve, a much better person that I'm working on. And so she really tried to be different. If you've seen the film, I'm sure you've seen the film or the play, she doesn't come across very nice very often, because she had very bad relationship with her mother, criticized all the other people, didn't obey, never did what she was supposed to do, so she was really quite difficult. But deep down, she really didn't like herself how she was, wanted to be a much better person. So Otto didn't know what to do, if he should publish it or not, but he was very, very proud of it. He showed it to everybody. And eventually he showed it to a history professor, and when he saw it, he said to him, you have to publish it, which he decided that he would do. It was published in Holland in 1947, but it wasn't such a great success, because even at that time, you know, people didn't really want to hear anything about the Holocaust. And it isn't even a Holocaust book. When I came back, I was very bitter, especially after I heard that I'd lost my father and my brother. I hated everybody. I didn't trust anybody, and I didn't really know what to do with myself. And then Otto came again. I told my mother Eva has to go back to school, which I did, but I was very, very miserable. I couldn't relate to my classmates because I felt much older after having gone through such a terrible experience. And but I wanted to talk. I wanted to tell everybody what I'd gone through. And I wanted people to feel sorry for me and to help me and so on. But whenever I wanted to say something, people say, well, we all have suffered, we don't want to hear. And it is amazing, now, after 65 years, or even longer now, people are more and more interested. If we would have organized something like this in 1955 or even 1960, if 2-3 people would have come, I would have been lucky. People didn't want to hear. And so as well with the diary, so it isn't a Holocaust story. Again, people didn't want to know too much about it. But when it was published in America in 1952, it became an immediate bestseller. Again, because by then people wanted to know a little bit, but not too much. And of course, Anne couldn't write about what had happened in the concentration camp. And so, of course, she still says, which is one of the most quoted writings, that she still believes in the goodness of mankind. And when it was translated in Germany, this is what people liked. You see, she has forgiven us. We were not so bad. She doesn't mind, And of course, this is all not true, because she didn't write it after she had experienced the camp. But so Otto came very often to our house. He formed, because there was a very, very small Jewish community, he knew their local rabbi, and he was very active to form a new little group. My mother and him went always on Friday to the liberal synagogue, and so they became very close, and Otto advised my mother what to do with me. And when I finished school, I still didn't care what I was going to do, and Otto, who had been a very keen photographer, and I was rather artistic, they decided it would be nice if you would become a photographer. And I didn't care, said all right. And so Otto knew somebody in London who had a photographic studio, and so he said it would be good for Eva to go a year abroad, so she gets out of this atmosphere here. And I got a job here as an apprentice in Woburn Square. And I lived in Cricklewood in a little boarding house run by a Czech refugee, and there were some other young people, and there was a young man who had come from Israel to study economics. And it was at that time very difficult to make contact with real English people. There were not many, we were bloody foreigners. And so I got quite friendly with this Israeli boy. We went for long walks, nobody had any money. And so after 6 months he said to me, I've fallen in love with you, and let's get married and start a new life in Israel. And I said, no way, because I'm here just for 1 year. I couldn't leave my mother alone. So he said, well, we'll see. And then Otto Frank came over again. He had some business here, and I explained this to him, and I introduced him. And he said, well, your mother and me have fallen in love as well, and when you are settled, we can get married. So this is what happened. I married my husband in 1952, so we've been married now for 58 years. And Otto and my mother married a year later, and they were married for 27 years, and I've never seen a happier marriage.